A couple of weeks ago I ran 100 kilometers and I'd spent over 6 months training for this one day, clocking up hundreds of miles of running alongside my weightlifting. I'd shifted my entire hybrid training towards a sole pursuit of finishing this ultra distance, and it was incredibly tough. But since this race, I've had time to reflect on what I think were the most important things I took away from that day, which are crucial for anyone thinking about running their first ultramarathon. So on a Saturday morning in July, Lil and I woke up bright and early and drove about an hour to the race's start line in the Peak District. The route I was running involved 2 separate 50-kilometre routes in a sort of figure of 8, with the start, middle and end all being in the town of Bakewell. And by 6:45 in the morning, I was off.
Good luck, guys!
So 1 kilometre down, really easy to keep track on this race. 1 kilometre equals 1%, so 99% to go.
This route involved 100 kilometres of running, which is nearly double the furthest I'd ever run before. But possibly more importantly was the over 2,000 metres of ascent. This would be the hardest physical challenge of my life so far. So in preparation I'd need to vastly increase the distances I was running and training, but I also needed to change the terrain I was running on, spending more times on trails and running up hills.
So about 4k in, a really steep start. Already done about 200 metres of ascent, which is quite a lot at 7 in the morning when you're just warming into it. I'm really struggling to get my words out. Not a great sign of things to come.
So over the roughly 6 months from booking the event to running the event, I built up my weekly mileage and tried to get onto some hilly off-road trails most weeks to build strength in my legs. And I booked a 50-kilometre ultra the month before, which I ran in early June, which was probably the best bit of preparation I did. Because with the best will in the world, it's still hard to emulate the conditions of an actual ultra run in training in terms of the fatigue, feeding and the physicality. My take was that the more I could run in training, the better. It's one of the few times in sports where you might be able to argue that the quantity of training is more important than its quality. But I also needed to be realistic. I didn't want to injure myself by running crazy distances too soon. And there's only so much free time I had alongside work, my life and my weightlifting too. Of course there'll be people who run these ultras with less preparation than me, and on the other hand there'll be quite a few people who run significantly further in training. But I think for me I got it about right.
For anyone that knows the Peak District, just running through Chatsworth Park and right past Chatsworth House.
So I was trundling through the miles and had started off relatively fast, finishing the first 10k in just over an hour. I wasn't trying to stick to a particular pace and I wasn't really aiming for a specific time, unlike my recent 50k, where I was firmly fixed on getting in under 6 hours, and ended up actually being a few seconds shy of that.
So with that split, I'm roughly on for a 10-hour finish time. Just to be clear, 10 hours is not happening. I ran my 50k in 6 hours and I was completely fucked at the end. Not putting a time in it today. Goal is to just finish.
As I'd never run a distance close to this before, I didn't know how I'd feel in the latter stages of the run. And even if I had, each course is very different, with the terrain, gradient, weather and nutrition having disproportionate effects on your pace than they might do over a shorter distance. Before these two ultras, I thought that a 6 minute per kilometre pace was something I could sustain indefinitely. Because over 20 or even 30 kilometres of flat running in training, at this pace I could keep my heart rate low, sustain a conversation and feel relatively fresh at the end. But when you also add into the mix the terrain and gradient you're running on, the accruing calorie deficit, and then you more than triple the distance you were covering with your long runs, you're faced with a different situation entirely. So I prefer to focus on milestones rather than keeping to a particular pace or time.
Hiya.
Just scan you in.
Finally, at the 14k mark, hit the snack aisle.
During this race, there were rest stops every 12.5k on average, so these were the milestones I was working to, knowing I'd have time for a short rest and a small meal before heading out for the next stint.
I feel like there's some big climbing coming, because apart from the first 5k, that was all pretty flat. So on a bite to eat, a bit of fluids, and I don't think I'll really stick around. I'll just head off.
Breaking this daunting 100-kilometre distance into 8 smaller sections helped me to keep focused and, most importantly, keep putting one foot in front of the other and making progress. With that in mind, I wasn't too bothered that my first 10 kilometres was faster than I anticipated, because it felt good and that's what was important. I think listening to your body during these endurance races is crucial. I knew my pace would drop significantly as time passed, but if I'd gone slower to begin with, I think I still would have run into all the same problems I did further down the line. I probably just would have crossed the finish line even later.
So about 18k in now, and since I last spoke to you about 4 kilometers ago, my predictions came true. It's literally just been a steady incline for 4k straight, and now a slightly steeper hill. They're sneaky how they fit all this ascent in. You think, oh, this isn't so bad, and they fill you up with danishes and push up the hill. Before this last year, a half marathon was the furthest I'd ever ran in one go. And it's crazy to think that today I'll be running nearly 5 of them back to back.
So by the time I got to my second rest stop, I knew I was a quarter of the way through, and so far I felt good.
Water straight ahead, exit to your left.
Nice one, thanks.
I'd learned from my recent 50k race how to manage my own nutrition, and this was one of the best reasons for doing a shorter ultra before I committed to the 100k. On average, I was burning around 800 calories an hour, maybe a little more, but whilst running I could only really absorb 300 calories an hour, as most of your blood is directed to your muscles rather than your gut. I saw other people at different stages eating protein bars and a pretty greasy looking bolognese at the halfway point, and personally I tried to avoid these foods, mainly because they had too much protein or fat for what I was looking for mid-race. Instead, I was trying as much as possible to eat mainly simple carbohydrates during the race, so that my digestive process was as efficient as possible, and I was maximising the amount of immediately accessible energy my body had to run on. And I didn't have to take too much food with me. I only had some jelly babies and a few gels in my running vest, plus a couple of litres of fluids. And that's because I knew from the event I did last month, which was through the same company, that these rest stops were so well stocked with food and drink and medical supplies. But if you're entering an ultra, it's really important to check how well stocked the rest stops will be and how far apart they are. So at the first station I had an apple Danish, and then at the second one a cookie, a pack of crisps and a Pepsi. And I kept up this sort of regular eating and it worked really well for me. My main concerns were underfueling and major gastrointestinal upsets. But thankfully with this strategy, I managed to avoid both of these.
Liv's been locked outside the fence. I don't think she's allowed in. There's no one here though. Oh, Liv.
Okay, keep you updated if you can, no worries. See you later, good luck!
So I'm almost 27k in. It's taken me about 3 hours and 8 minutes. And I've done about 600 meters of elevation. So I've just got to do that 3 more times. And that's an ultramarathon. Second time this race I've needed to take this flipping jacket off. I don't think the 20 quid price tag and the breathable description really go together. There we are, cold again.
Running, I've discovered, is like any other sport, where if you're inclined you can spend a small fortune on gear. In my limited experience, there's only a few essential bits of gear I needed for the ultra. And those are a good pair of trail shoes, a running vest with water flasks and storage space, and some quality breathable clothing, including a windproof jacket. In terms of my own gear, I was wearing the Salomon Ultra Glide 2s and then just had a basic Salomon running vest, which worked fine. These shoes had a decent amount of cushioning and were meant for these ultra distances, and they also had quite a light tread on, so perfect for a summer ultra. And in my running vest I was able to carry 2.5 litres of fluids across the pouches on the front and the camelback I had on the back. Clothing wise, I was wearing some 2-in-1 shorts, which are really essential for running these distances if you want to avoid the chub rub. I was also then wearing some merino wool socks, a horrendously coordinated charity t-shirt from Young Lives vs Cancer, and then a cheap fluorescent running jacket, which wasn't particularly windproof nor breathable, but it did the job. Aside from these essentials, you've then got a couple of optional extras, and these include things like running poles, GPS watches, sunglasses, caps, etc, etc.
I'm literally just using the Apple Watch SE at the moment, so the cheapo one.
But for the event that I was doing, a GPS watch wasn't strictly essential because the course was excellently signposted with regular kilometre markers as well. Obviously, if you were doing a night run or something more remote, you would almost certainly want a more serious running watch, something like the Garmin Fenix or an Apple Watch Ultra, where you can preload the running route onto the device and also be confident that you've got plenty of battery to complete the distance. But aside from running specific gear, most events will provide a kit list of a few of the bits you'd want to bring and might be able to fit into a running vest. The main ones being your phone, baby wipes, sun cream, a mini first aid kit and blister repair kit, maybe some Vaseline and so on.
I feel like I filmed a disproportionate amount of the downhill compared to the uphill. I promise you I have ran up as well. It's just that I'm a sweaty, groaning mess when I'm going uphill. Oh no. Big hill incoming. I jog up the foothills and walk up the steep bits. We'll see if any of the walking actually makes it to the video though. Oop. The hills are starting to feel harder than they did at the beginning. I think this is the first time so far today that I can confidently say I'm running with a tailwind.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. It's about 10k until halfway, and I'm just about to hit 5 hours. Woo! That's the 50k mark on my watch. No halfway point in sight though. It's a bit disappointing. Okay, I'm getting the feeling that this 50k rest stop is at 52k.
Good job, Bobby. Stay to the right.
So if you're running your first 100k ultra, it's unlikely you will have ran anywhere near close to that in the past, even if you did a good amount of preparation. So what I'm trying to say is that physical preparation only gets you so far, and what's possibly more important on the day is your mental endurance. As I pushed on past 50k, I was stepping into unknown territory, and this is where things got really tricky.
Setting off in the second half now. Had about half an hour there, which is just the perfect amount of time to cool down. But it's all good. We're 52% through, 52k. 48 to go, let's get it.
Cardiovascularly, I felt I still had plenty in the tank to keep going, and my energy levels were okay because I'd been really careful with my nutrition and hydration. My main issue at this point was what I now call musculoskeletal attrition. Ultra running requires you to take tens of thousands of repetitive steps, with each step often exerting forces equal to several times your weight through your lower body. And over these ultra distances, the muscular fatigue and stress on your joints and soft tissues compounds, meaning that it gets exponentially harder as you progress.
The thing that literally everyone says about 100k or ultramarathons or any ultra event like this is that it's so much more a mental game than a physical game. And I guess these next 45k or so, I've come to really understand what that means.
Past the 50k mark, I didn't see any other runners in my cohort actually running up any of the hills, and that's me included. I was physically incapable of opening up my gait on the uphill, and I was just resigned to walking up every incline, like everyone else around me.
This terrain is just so hard to run on. It's frustrating, the strength of my hip flexors. They just don't have enough power to like lift my legs up consistently. So these little low rocks just keep tripping on if I try and run over them.
I needed to find a way to keep putting one foot in front of the other, despite how uncomfortable I was, and keep making forward progress into the unknown. And after about the 60k mark, I was just fighting demons.
The weather's pretty bleak at the moment. I have a nasty feeling I've just gone the wrong way. It's just so frustrating. I've walked the last kilometre or so, and the only reason I started running again is because of the wind. I was freezing. So yeah, about 62k in. Things are pretty tough right now. The blisters on my right foot, they're not awful. It's just every single step they're present in there, even with all the strapping. My right knee's giving me a bit of trouble. There's nothing at the moment that's going to stop me, but it sure as hell is slowing me down. Back the path again. Sun's out. Not having a complete meltdown quite yet.
For me, I knew that I was raising money for a charity close to my heart, which helped my sister through her fight with cancer. So that's what drove me on. And having supporters there on the day, my wife, my friends and my in-laws, well, that was invaluable. I wasn't much fun to talk to because at each rest stop I would just sit, eat in silence and then move on. But their presence was still a huge motivator.
G'day guys.
And on top of that, I drew inspiration from the fact that I was pushing myself harder than I had before. And with that thought came a real grit and determination to keep going.
So I'm approaching 2/3, and I heard a rumour from someone at the last rest stop that this section might be a little flatter. And we've just made it up onto an old train line. It does look flat. And it's literally my favourite surface to run on, so we're winning. I think 6 to 9 kilometres is my highest ever weekly mileage, and I've just done it in one go. As long as this track keeps going, I'm going to keep running. And I don't think I've ever meant it as much as I do right now, but it is time to dig deep. Heading off now, got the England game playing, so I'm hoping this will get me through the next hour and give me a boost for the finish. Half time, it's 0-0, the sun has come out, I'm still on this absolutely beautiful track. Things are good. It feels like I'm just getting kilometres in the bank, because I know it will get tougher. I know there's a lot of ascent to go, but I've only got 24k left. And getting to this point, I wasn't 100% sure I'd get here 20 kilometres ago, whereas right now I'm confident that I'm finishing. So come on Andrew, and come on England! To go. I'm pretty sure I can walk 20k before midnight. Let's hope it doesn't come to that though. Everything other than completely flat ground at the moment is just agony for my quads. So I'm going downhill. In the first 20k I'll be sprinting down here. Right, feeling low, 18k to go. There's only one thing for it, jelly babies. Watch has finally died.
So I was closing out the last few kilometres, and despite my slow and painful physical demise, my mental strength remained strong and I was rallied by the turn in the weather as the sun came out. That and England's quarter-final win over Switzerland in the Euros. But I made it to the final rest stop at 89 Ks, and now I was certain I'd make it to the finish line.
Oh, hello. Leaving the final rest stop. I feel great. I mean, I don't, but as in, like, I feel so much better than I did at around 60k. Oh my god. Let's finish strong. Let's get this last 10k.
As I hobbled through the last section of the race, I had time to reflect on the journey that I've been on in these last 6 months or so training for today. The run had been brutal and I'd felt pretty much every emotion at some point throughout the race. But despite having been running for over 12 hours by this point, it still all kind of felt like a blur.
I know I've not always been the biggest fan of this 100k at different points today, but when you're only 4k from the finish line and with views like this.
I passed the last few markers and eventually made it to the home straight.
Is there a burst of pace coming? Almost certainly not, but there's something coming, and that's probably McDonald's. Not long to go, come on.
Go on, Andrew! Go on, Andrew!
I crossed the finish line with my final time of 14 hours and 33 minutes, and I took it all in.
That was so bad.
I just so wanted that to be over for the last 50k.
I got my photo and then I escaped the event and headed for the Golden Arches. But after running hundreds of miles in training, overcoming injuries, spending large amounts of money and making big sacrifices to get there, it was now all over, and I've been thinking to myself, was it worth it? Well, that's hard to say. I distinctly remember during large portions of the race thinking that although this was my first 100k, it was almost certainly going to be my last too. I think what I have learned from completing this 100k is that the event or the goal doesn't validate the journey it took to get there. I didn't feel like a different man as I crossed the line, despite what was objectively a huge achievement for me. I suppose I did the next morning, where I felt like I'd gone to bed a 27-year-old and woke up an 80-year-old, but that wasn't necessarily the transformation I've been looking for. Instead, I've been thinking that it was the journey itself that validated the journey, if that makes sense. The end result of completing this ultra was just the cherry on top. I've realised that I'm more bothered about the personal growth that comes from setting a goal, making a strategy, and then turning up each and every day, putting in the hard work to make it a reality, whether or not you even accomplish that goal at the end. And that might not ring true with everybody, but I think for me that was my biggest takeaway. So as I've been nursing my swollen knee these last couple of weeks and taking an imposed break from running, that's what's been getting me through the recovery as I think about what's next for me. And if you're interested in what that might look like, well, subscribe for more running, lifting and general fitness content, and I'll see you again next time.